Chapter 25. Catherine awoke the morning of the festival with dried cake batter under her nails and a smear of frosting discovered behind one ear. It had been well after midnight by the time her spiced pumpkin cake had cooled enough to be frosted. Though she was anxious about the contest, she wasn't afraid. She and Marianne had done a test run with a pumpkin from the market, and that first cake had been exactly what she'd hoped it would be, moist and rich, with hints of nutmeg and brown sugar mixed together with sweet roasted pumpkin that melted lusciously in the mouth, all layered with velvety, decadent cream cheese frosting. And on a whim, she had topped it off with shreds of toasted coconut, adding a hint of crunch and extra sweetness. She'd been pleased with the trial cake, and after making a few minor adjustments, she was confident that the final product would be even more extraordinary. Catherine could not wait to see the judges' faces when they tried it, even the king's. She didn't have to wear a formal gown as the festival took place on the sandy, rocky beach, and she would most likely be cold and wet by the end of it. But as her family was hosting the annual celebration, she was still expected to don a corset and a full-skirted wool dress that her mother picked out, emerald green and showing more décolletage than she would have liked. She did her best to hide it with a crocheted lace wrap that clung to her neck and shoulders, fastened with an amber medallion. When Catherine saw her reflection, she couldn't help but think of Geste and how the amber brooch was almost the same color as his eyes. The festival was well underway when Catherine and her parents arrived. Their carriage stopped at the top of the white cliffs, with the festival laid out on the shore below. Enormous tents cluttered the beach, their canvas walls painted in harlequin diamonds and strips and plates, their pennants flags snapping in the wind. Within the tents were pottery and paintings, pearl necklaces and wind-up toys, crocheted stockings and hand-stitched books that would forever have pages curled from the salty air. From atop the cliffs, she spied the beluga whale, a cappella quartet harmonizing on the beach, and a sizable crowd awaiting the start of the first seahorse race, and an octopus face painter industriously painting 8 faces at once. Then there were the tents that held Catherine's favorite part of the festival, carnival food. She could already smell the oil and garlic and applewood smoke. Her stomach rumbled. She'd intentionally skipped breakfast in anticipation of her most beloved festival treats, a savory meat pie, cinnamon roasted pecans, and a soft sticky bun, the type that melted on her tongue and coated her lips in honey and crushed walnuts. It was a treacherous climb down the steps that led to the beach, made more so as Catherine kept scanning the crowds below rather than keeping her focus on the path. Her eyes skipped over the lobsters and crabs and starfish and walruses and dodo birds and flamingos and frogs and salamanders and pigeons. She was looking only at the people. She was looking for a black tunic and a 3-pointed jester's hat. She was listening for the telltale jingle of tiny bells. She was expecting a crowd circled around the performer, mesmerized and awed by some breathtaking spectacle. But she reached the sandy shore without seeing any sign of Geste. In fact, she had not seen the king either. Perhaps they would arrive together. The Marquess and Marchioness wandered off to greet their high society guests, leaving Catherine to explore the tents. She bought her meat pie first, hoping it would settle some of her nerves. Success! The moment she broke apart the flaky crust and breathed in the cloud of seasoned steam, she did feel calmer. A euphoric, drool-inducing calm. It was a brisk, grey day on the beach, the wind catching at her shawl, but none of the creatures of hearts seemed anything but jolly. The Marchioness had been a bundle of fears the day before. Word had spread fast after Catherine had told Cheshire about finding the pony from the lion's hat, and a search party was sent to scour the area surrounding the farm for any more signs of the lion or the Jabberwock. But they'd found nothing. A theory was posed that the Jabberwock might be sheltering itself inside the Nowhere forest, and the pony had fallen as the monster carried the lion over the pumpkin patch. With tales of the Jabberwock renewed, the Marchioness had worried that people would stay locked up in their homes during the festival, but her concerns seemed unfounded. The crowd bustled and thrived. Catherine smiled her way through the familiar faces, but her mind was distracted, her eyes always searching for the one person she wanted to see. None of the usual jewels and baubles held any interest to her, though her purse was jangling with coins her father had spared her that morning. Even the spice shop, with its exotic aromas and unusual ingredients, did not capture her enthusiasm as it usually did. Wishing for a distraction, she headed for the largest tent, where the contest would be held. Marianne had brought the cake with her when she and the other servants had come to finish last-minute preparations, and Catherine hadn't seen her creation since the night before. In the grandstand tent, the chairs were empty, but for a few geese resting their wings after the long migration to make it to the festival on time. Catherine passed through the rows and up to the case that held the entries, and there, on the second shelf, 3 desserts from the left, sat her spiced pumpkin cake. The icing scalloped on the sides and woven like a basket on top. A tiny white ghost pumpkin was settled into the snowdrifts of toasted coconut, Marianne's idea. She scanned their competition. It was mostly an assortment of fruit pies, a chocolate torte, 2 dessert puddings, and a small cake with "Eat Me" spelled out in currants on top. None were so pretty as hers, but that meant nothing for their taste. "I believe in you, little cake," she whispered to her creation. "I believe you are the best," she hesitated. "I believe we're the best." Feeling more anxious than comforted, she hurried from the tent. She had just turned down the main row of shops, her sweet tooth awakened and dreaming of those cinnamon roasted nuts, when someone grabbed the brim of her bonnet and pulled it off her head. The ribbon caught on her chin and it fell, hanging down her back. She spun around as another, heavier hat was placed on her head. Hatta stepped back and crossed his arms, looking not at her, but at the hat now atop her head. He looked too refined for the damp, dirty surroundings, done up in a formal cut navy suit and an orange and apple striped waistcoat. His white hair peeked out from a matching orange and purple top hat. A candy stick dangled from his thoughtfully downturned mouth. "Hello again," said Kath. He tipped his hat to her, swirling the candy stick around to the other side of his lips. "M'lady." Catherine reached up for the white brim of the hat he had set on her head, but he stopped her. He said, taking hold of her hand and sweeping her up the steps. There is a mirror back here. She realized with a start that she was in the hatter's shop, the same rickety traveling wagon she'd seen in the forest, with the hand-lettered sign over the door, Hatter's Marvelous Millinery. She couldn't imagine how she hadn't spotted it earlier among the tents. One window, she noticed, was still broken from the Jabberwock's attack, now boarded over with uneven planks and iron nails. Like before, the shop was larger on the inside than the out. But now, the long table and mismatched chairs were gone, replaced with an assortment of display cases and hat stands and mannequin heads, two of which were having a discussion about fashionable cameo necklaces. The collection of hats had multiplied. There were top hats with ear holes cut out for bunny rabbits. There were waterproof hats for dolphins and sunbathing hats for lizards and acorn stashing hats for squirrels. There were veils made from ostrich feathers and modest bonnets encrusted in rhinestones, and one netted hat that would have draped over a person's body like an enormous birdcage. Beyond the bizarre and unexpected, there were also simple things, lovely things. Dainty cronets done up in gold and pearls, white-brimmed garden hats covered in soft moss and chiming bluebells, silk headdresses ornamented with intricately spun spider webs. As Catherine passed, admiring them all, Hatter reached for the tie of her bonnet and pulled it off her neck. She spotted a standing mirror in the corner, shining with the light of a lantern on the wall. Crossing the room, she stood before the mirror and promptly started to laugh. The hatter had made for her a replica of a rose macaron. 2 meringue biscuits were made from cream-colored muslin and speckled with pink sparkles, and the sweet buttercream filling was constructed from layer upon layer of gathered lace. It was ridiculous and unflattering in every way. Kath loved it immediately. "Good heavens, Hatter! And here I thought you didn't like me." "My gifts by their nature do not equal affection, my lady." In the mirror, she saw him scowl. "Rather, let us say that I was inspired by your performance." She turned to face him. "So, you don't like me?" "I like you well enough." His purple eyes glinted. "I like you better when you're wearing one of my hats. What do you think?" She looked at her reflection and couldn't help but laugh again. "It's like nothing I've ever worn before." Reaching up, she squeezed the bottom cookie and found that it was soft and squishable. "I'm quite fond of it, actually." "Good, it's yours." No, I couldn't." She pulled the hat off her head, surprised at how light it was, despite its girth. Hatter scoffed. "I said it's yours, so it's yours. You can't give it back once it's been given. Now put it back on before your head gets cold. I hate to see bare heads." "If you insist." She resisted a smile as she settled the macaron hat back onto her head. Remembering the coins in her purse, she asked, "Can I at least pay you for it?" "Now you're just being rude. Consider it an apology, Lady Pinkerton, for the way my humble gala ended in such terror. I usually seek to send my guests home without first endangering their lives." "Surely, the attack was not your fault." He held her gaze a long moment before replying. "I am glad to see that you made it home safely, Lady Pinkerton." "As I did. Thank you for the gift, Hatter. It will be cherished." She glanced at the mirror one more time. It was impossible not to grin. "There has been a lot of talk about your creations lately. It seems you are earning a grand reputation."
"Reputations are fickle. Profits are not," she smirked.
"That's something my maid would say." Kath turned to face him. "It's an impressive feat, is all I meant, to become so popular so quickly. Your hats are marvelous indeed."
"I appreciate the compliment. I dare say Hearts was without a proper hatter for far too long."
"Perhaps you're right." Kath glanced around at the hats and headdresses that lined the walls. A rainbow of colors, a kaleidoscope of styles, a jamboree of textures. Every one of them seemed half magical. "I vaguely recall one other fine hatter years ago, but I was just a child. My mother purchased from him regularly. I wonder whatever became of him."
"He went mad," said Hatta, with hardly a pause. "Then he killed himself, with a brim toliker, if my memory serves."
She turned back to gape at him. Hatta was watching her, but his expression was unreadable.
"Haven't you ever heard the saying, 'mad as a hatter'?" he asked. "It's an unfortunate family trait, one that's been passed down for generations." Her lips pursed into a surprised O, but Kath couldn't form a question or an apology, though both lingered on her tongue. Finally, Hatta asked her, "Don't stand there looking so tragic, love. My father, and his father, and so many fathers back that one could never count them all. Everyone a fine, gentlemanly hatter, and everyone mad as March. But..." His mouth curved into a sly smile. "I know a secret they didn't know, so perhaps my fate isn't as hopeless." Kath forced her mouth shut. Now that he had reminded her of the story, she could recall the tale of the hatter who had killed himself so many years ago. Why, Hatta must have been just a boy. But like all tragedies in Hearts, it had been hushed and swept away, never to be spoken of again. Her confusion increased when she thought of Jess's tale. She had assumed Hatta was from Chess too, but how could he be from Chess and Hearts both?
"May I know the secret?" she asked.
He looked appalled to have been asked. "You do know that telling a secret destroys its secrecy, don't you?"
I figured as much. She wondered faintly if there really was a secret at all, or if telling himself so was a part of his inherited madness. Was he mad already? She couldn't help inspecting him, newly speculative and curious. He didn't seem mad. No more mad than anyone else she knew. No more mad than she was herself. They were all a little mad, if one was to be forthright. "Well," she said, trying to push her thoughts back toward civilized conversation, "I'm glad to see your hat shop doing so well. I'm wishing the best for you."
"Wishes have value, Lady Pinkerton. You have my gratitude." He tipped his hat toward her. "If it isn't presumptuous of me, might I suggest wearing the macaron during the baking contest? I trust you are a participant."
"Oh, I am actually."
"Good." He leaned closer.
"Have you ever noticed how attraction is a subjective thing, difficult to capture in headwear? But charisma, now that is more universal. I think I've accomplished something spectacular. One might even say you look irresistible right now, not unlike the treat that inspired the hat." He winked, though Kath wasn't sure what the wink meant. "I'm not sure I had noticed that," she confessed.
He shrugged. "Others will, I assure you."
His statement was punctuated by a trumpet blaring from the beach, reminding Kath that she was still at her family's festival, and she still had the role of the Marquess's daughter to play. Her drain returned tenfold.
Forgive me, but I must go dance the lobster quadrille.
Oh, yes. Hatta drifted his hand through the air.
Obligations rest heavy on the shoulders of nobility.
She couldn't tell whether he was insulting her or not.
Heavier than you might think. Thank you again for the gift.
Will you wear it during the dancing also? I'm sure you'll be at the very center of attention, and a businessman couldn't complain over the attention. Kath pulled the hat more firmly onto her head.
Hatta, I'm not sure I shall ever take it off.
He bowed. Then off you go. And please, if you happen to see His Majesty, I hope you'll give him my regards. She stumbled halfway to the door.
His Majesty?
Hatta's violent eyes glinted.
The King of Hearts! Love, I thought you knew him, but as you look so surprised, I must have been mistaken.
He held his hands out in supplication. Nevertheless, your path is more likely to cross with him than is mine, and I wouldn't complain of a kind reference put forth to our sovereign. His smile turned wry. After all, I am a man of ambitions, Lady Pinkerton.